I'm Sarah Coleman, and for most of my adult life, I believed family meant loyalty without limits. I was wrong. By the time I was 32, I had spent 7 years quietly pouring nearly $250,000 into keeping my parents' household afloat, believing that love was proven through sacrifice, and that being dependable meant never saying no. I paid mortgages and utilities, covered car payments and insurance, and smoothed over every emergency that appeared without warning. I did it while being treated like background noise in my own family, the reliable figure who existed to solve problems rather than be seen. Growing up, I learned early where I stood in the Coleman family. My younger sister Amanda was the golden child, the one whose smallest efforts were celebrated as victories. I was the achiever, the daughter expected to excel without applause. Excellence was assumed from me, while mediocrity from her was praised as promise. Those lessons shaped me more than I understood at the time. I learned to swallow disappointment, to perform competence quietly, and to believe that approval would come later if I just did enough. I never stopped hoping that one day my effort would earn the same warmth Amanda received simply for existing. Our family's fragile balance shattered in the year 2016 when my father lost his job after nearly 2 decades of steady work. I was finishing college then, still believing that families rallied together in crises and then returned to independence once the storm passed. What actually happened was something very different. My parents closed ranks around Amanda, protecting her from adult responsibility, while I became the solution to every financial problem. I worked multiple jobs while finishing my degree, sent money home whenever bills piled up, and learned that my role was not temporary. It was permanent. After graduating and landing my first real job in Austin, I tasted independence for the first time. A modest apartment, a used car, a steady paycheck. It felt like freedom. That feeling didn't last long. Calls from home shifted from casual check-ins to whispered panic about overdue payments. I told myself it was short-term help, just until things stabilized. The first check I sent opened a door that never closed. Within months, I was covering more than half of their expenses. By the end of the year, I was supporting 2 households on an entry-level salary. While I quietly funded survival, Amanda continued living as if nothing had changed. She chased one dream after another, each announced with enthusiasm, and each abandoned when reality demanded effort. Culinary school, a food truck, an online boutique, cryptocurrency schemes. Each venture drained thousands of dollars that somehow came from a household I was subsidizing. My parents praised her vision and resilience while treating my steady career as ordinary, even boring. I tracked every payment I made in spreadsheets, not because I wanted recognition, but because some part of me needed proof that I wasn't imagining the imbalance. Years passed this way. My career advanced slowly, strained by constant interruptions and stress. Opportunities came with strings I wasn't sure I could manage while carrying my family's weight. I told myself this was what strong people did. They carried others. They endured. They waited. But resentment built quietly, layering over guilt and obligation, until it hardened into something dangerous. 3 days before New Year's Eve 2024, Amanda admitted she was drowning in credit card debt. The amount stunned me, especially when I learned she had used my name as a reference. My parents immediately turned to me, asking for help, assuming I would fix it the way I always had. For the first time, I hesitated. I said I needed time to think, and that pause alone felt like rebellion. I decided to host a New Year's Eve gathering at my parents' house, hoping a celebration might soften a hard conversation about boundaries. I spent money I couldn't spare on decorations and food, believing that honesty delivered gently might finally change something. I didn't know I was planning the night everything would break open. I didn't know that 7 years of silence were about to collide with midnight, and that the person everyone relied on was about to stop giving. New Year's Eve in Cedar Park arrived cold and bright. The kind of Texas winter night that makes every light look sharper and every sound carry farther. By late afternoon, I was in my parents' kitchen, arranging trays of appetizers and setting out champagne flutes, trying to make the house feel festive, as if sparkle and music could cover the rot underneath. At around 7 p.m., relatives began to arrive, bringing tamales and desserts, laughter and small talk, the easy comfort of people who assumed our family was normal because it looked normal from the outside. My mother floated through the living room with brittle cheer. My father checked his phone too often. Amanda kept fidgeting with her jewelry, as if she could shake off anxiety by moving her hands. At around 10:30 p.m., Amanda stood up like she was stepping onto a stage and announced she had something exciting to share. I recognized the tone immediately, the same breathless confidence she used for every reinvention. She launched into a pitch for a fitness app she claimed would change everything, describing artificial intelligence and personalized workouts with the borrowed fluency of someone who had watched hours of entrepreneur videos. Then she said the number. She needed $40,000 to build a prototype and launch marketing. She spoke as if the money were a simple detail, like deciding between appetizers, and the room responded the way it always did when Amanda dreamed out loud. Polite nods, encouraging smiles, soft praise for her initiative. I tried to keep my face calm. I worked in software. I knew what it took to build a real product, how teams and timelines and testing worked. I asked careful questions, not to humiliate her, but because I didn't want another fantasy swallowing more of the family's resources. Had she researched the competition? Did she have developers lined up? What was her plan to acquire users? Each question made her posture stiffen, her smile tightening like a mask under pressure. My mother cut in with the same reflex she'd had my entire life, warning me not to be negative, telling me to let my sister dream. In that moment, I felt the familiar role snap into place around me. The responsible one who spoiled the mood, the practical sister who ruined Amanda's spotlight. As the television shifted into the countdown programming and the room grew louder from champagne, Amanda's irritation sharpened into something mean. At around 11:45 p.m., she turned on me with a voice loud enough to draw attention from every corner of the living room. She said I lived a boring, safe little life, that I had no vision, no courage, no risk in me, and that I would always be ordinary because I was too scared to reach for something extraordinary. The words landed like an open-handed slap. I saw relatives glance at each other, uncomfortable, waiting for me to swallow it the way I always had. I felt heat rise behind my eyes, but it wasn't sadness. It was rage. Clean and bright, the kind that arrives when the truth finally becomes impossible to ignore. I had spent 7 years taking risks that none of them acknowledged. I had risked my savings, my future, my career focus, my peace. I had risked being trapped forever in a role I didn't choose, and I had done it all without applause. And here was Amanda calling me afraid, while my money propped up her parents' house and cushioned her endless failures. Something in me snapped, not into hysteria, but into clarity. I stood up and walked toward the center of the room. My voice came out calm, almost eerily steady, as if my body had finally decided that emotion was a luxury I no longer owed anyone. I said we could talk about risk if they wanted. I said we should talk about the risks I'd been taking for years. The room quieted fast. My father lowered his drink. My mother's smile drained away. Amanda's mouth opened like she wanted to interrupt, but no sound came. I started naming what I had done, not with drama, but with precision. I spoke about the food truck that lasted a few months. I spoke about the jewelry business that became a hobby closet. I spoke about the mortgage payments, the utilities, the car payments, the insurance. I described how, year after year, I had quietly carried more than most people's entire rent on my shoulders, and how the total, over 7 years, came close to $250,000. I watched my relatives' faces change as the numbers sank in. Shock, then disbelief, then a dawning realization that the family story they'd been told was missing a central truth. Amanda tried to protest, claiming it wasn't fair that I kept track. My laugh surprised me, harsh and bitter. I reminded them that only days earlier, they had asked me to co-sign a consolidation loan for the debt Amanda had racked up, and that she had used my information as a reference like it was nothing, like my stability was just another tool she could grab when she wanted. At around 11:58 p.m., with the television roaring toward midnight and fireworks popping in the distance, my father erupted. He slammed his fist down and shouted that I didn't belong there, that I was ruining everything, that I was ungrateful and bitter. My mother's voice followed, sharp as glass, accusing me of jealousy. For years, those words would have gutted me. They would have sent me spiraling into guilt, scrambling to fix what I had broken. But in that moment, I felt something else instead. Emptiness, where fear used to live. I looked at them and realized they truly believed my help was not generosity, but duty. Not sacrifice, but obligation. They thought they could shame me back into my place. And because the new year was seconds away, because everyone was watching, because the truth was finally out in the open, I said the sentence that ended it. I told them to let Amanda cover the amount I had been paying for the next year. The silence that followed was louder than my father's shouting. Even the television felt distant. I picked up my purse and walked toward the door while the countdown hit 0, while the city outside celebrated fresh beginnings. Behind me, voices rose, Amanda crying, my mother calling my name, my father shouting threats that blurred into noise. I stepped into the cold night air and felt as if I had been underwater for years and finally surfaced. At around 12:30 a.m., I drove through nearly empty streets toward my apartment. Fireworks bloomed over Austin like bright wounds in the sky. My hands on the steering wheel were steady. I wasn't numb. I was awake. And for the first time in 7 years, their crisis was not automatically mine. By the time I reached my apartment a little after 1 a.m., the adrenaline had settled into something colder and more deliberate. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and did what I had been trained to do for years at work. I solved the problem in front of me. The difference was that for the first time, the problem was not theirs. It was mine. And the solution was boundaries. The first thing I canceled was the mortgage payment. For 7 years, $1,200 had left my account at the start of every month like a silent obligation. Never questioned, never thanked. My finger hovered for a moment over the cancel button, muscle memory whispering that I was being selfish, cruel, ungrateful. Then I remembered my father's face twisted with rage as he told me I didn't belong, and my mother's voice accusing me of bitterness. I clicked cancel. The confirmation screen appeared, impersonal and final, and the relief was immediate, like setting down a weight I had forgotten was optional. Next came the utilities. Electricity, water, gas, trash. All of it had been in my name. All of it paid automatically, as if the house were mine. I logged into each account and transferred responsibility back to my father, entering his email address carefully, imagining the surprise waiting for him in the morning. I removed my payment methods, one by one, watching the totals drop to 0 on my screen. With every click, my chest felt lighter. The car payments were more complicated, requiring phone calls I would have to make after the holiday. But I drafted emails that night to both lenders, stating clearly that I would no longer be making payments and requesting immediate reassignment to the primary borrowers. Insurance followed. Auto, home, health, policies I had paid for years without discussion. I canceled them with proper notice, knowing they would have time to scramble, but also knowing that scrambling was no longer my responsibility. The cell phone plan felt almost personal. Amanda's unlimited data, her newest device, her constant streaming, all funded quietly by me while I counted groceries. I logged into the account, changed the password, removed every line but my own, and scheduled termination for the rest. Internet and cable followed. The services I had paid for so they could relax while I worked disappeared with a few clicks. I realized how strange it was that cutting off entertainment felt more emotional than canceling the mortgage. Maybe because it symbolized comfort I had never allowed myself. The final step was the security system. Years earlier, after a burglary on their street, I had paid for cameras, sensors, smart locks, and monitoring, all connected through an app on my phone. I opened it one last time and saw the aftermath of the party I had left behind. Empty glasses, decorations skewed, the tree lights still blinking cheerfully over chaos. I scrolled to account settings and found the option to deactivate everything. The warning message told me it was permanent. I thought about how I had installed that system to protect them, to give myself peace of mind, and how now I was the villain in their story. I confirmed. The screens went dark. By around 4 a.m., every financial tie was cut. I closed my laptop and sat in the quiet of my apartment, listening to the city exhale after celebration. For the first time in years, every dollar in my account belonged to me. Every bill I owed was my own. I slept deeply, without dreams. I woke after sunrise to my phone buzzing non-stop, missed calls, voicemails, texts stacking faster than I could read them. My mother's voice was frantic, describing power outages and cold water, pleading for me to fix whatever I had done. My father's message was worse, accusing me of abuse, threatening police and lawyers, demanding I restore everything by noon. For a moment, the old fear flared, the reflex to apologize, to smooth things over, to make it right. Then another message came through, unexpected and grounding. It was from Mrs. Chen, the elderly neighbor who had lived next door for decades. She told me the police had already been there and had said it was a civil matter between adults. She told me she had watched me take care of that family for years while they treated me poorly, and that I had done the right thing. I read her message twice, tears finally pricking my eyes, not from guilt, but from validation. To be sure, I called my cousin Kevin, a lawyer who never sugarcoated anything. He listened as I explained, then laughed, not unkindly, and told me my father's threats were empty. There was no law requiring adult children to fund their parents' lives. Voluntary payments could be stopped at any time. If anything, he said, the pattern looked more like exploitation than obligation. His certainty steadied me in a way nothing else could. Later that morning, I checked a backup feed from the security system before it fully disconnected. Police cars sat in the driveway while my father paced in a bathrobe, gesturing wildly. The officers looked bored, ready to leave. And they did. No handcuffs, no charges, just reality, arriving without ceremony. As the day went on, the messages kept coming, but they lost their power. I made coffee in my warm kitchen and felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Peace. Their emergency was no longer my emergency, and for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't built around fixing someone else's life. Within days, the fallout spread beyond my phone and into the small, observant world of Cedar Park. In a neighborhood where routines were predictable and gossip traveled faster than mail, the sight of police cars in my parents' driveway ignited speculation. My parents told neighbors I had suffered some kind of breakdown, that I had abandoned them in a moment of instability. That story didn't last long. Too many people had watched the same patterns for too many years. Mrs. Chen became an unexpected anchor of truth. She spoke calmly but firmly to anyone who asked, describing what she had seen from her kitchen window week after week. Me arriving with groceries every weekend, me fixing steps and mowing lawns, me leaving exhausted, while Amanda stayed inside ordering packages and posting photos. Her words carried weight because she had nothing to gain by lying. She had simply paid attention. Others began to speak up too. neighbors and family friends who remembered loans Amanda never repaid, or emergencies I quietly handled without complaint. The reckoning reached the extended family quickly. My aunt and uncle confronted my parents in their now cold living room, and the polite silence that had surrounded our family for years finally broke. They talked about favoritism, about how differently Amanda and I had been treated since childhood, about how destructive it was to enable one child while draining the other. No one raised their voice. They didn't have to. The truth did the work for them. Amanda tried to defend herself, framing everything as misunderstanding and jealousy, but the patience for those explanations was gone. People who had watched her cycle through dreams funded by other people's money were no longer interested in protecting her feelings. Social consequences followed practical ones. Church friends who had once admired my parents' image of stability pulled back. Conversations became awkward, then distant. Amanda tried to reclaim the narrative online, posting a dramatic account of betrayal and abandonment, but the response shocked her. Old classmates, neighbors, even acquaintances she had borrowed from added comments about unpaid debts and entitled behavior. The sympathy she expected never arrived. Instead, her image shifted from misunderstood dreamer to cautionary tale. Meanwhile, my life grew quieter in the best way. Without constant financial drain, my mind cleared. I showed up differently at work, focused, present, no longer flinching every time my phone buzzed. When my manager revisited the promotion conversation, I was ready. I accepted the role, the increased responsibility no longer feeling like an impossible burden. For the first time, my effort benefited me directly. I began saving, investing, planning. I met with a financial advisor who gently laid out what 7 years of investing could have become. The number was painful to hear, but it also strengthened my resolve. I refused to lose another decade to obligation masquerading as love. I also began therapy. Sitting across from a professional who named what I had lived through was both disorienting and healing. She explained how families sometimes assign roles that benefit the system rather than the individuals inside it, and how breaking those roles feels like betrayal to those who depend on them. Hearing that my boundaries were not cruelty but self-respect rewired something fundamental in me. I wasn't defective for needing distance. I was human. As months passed, the contrast between our lives grew stark. My parents downsized after losing the house they could no longer afford. My father took work wherever he could find it. My mother added hours to her schedule. Amanda stayed in her retail job, facing debts she could no longer outrun now that no one was cushioning her falls. I didn't celebrate their struggles, but I didn't rescue them either. For the first time, they were living with the consequences of their own choices, not mine. The most surprising change was internal. Without the constant pressure to perform usefulness, I discovered who I was when I wasn't needed. I learned to rest without guilt, to enjoy quiet mornings, to build relationships that didn't hinge on what I could provide. When someone new entered my life and listened to my story without trying to justify my family's behavior, I realized how distorted my idea of love had been. Real care didn't demand self-erasure. I used to believe that endurance was my greatest strength. Now I know discernment is. I learned that generosity without boundaries isn't kindness, it's self-abandonment. Walking away from people who benefited from my silence was the hardest thing I've ever done. But it was also the moment my life truly began to belong to me. By the time the following year arrived, my life no longer felt like something I was surviving. It felt like something I was actively building. I moved into a downtown Austin condo with tall windows and quiet mornings, a space chosen because it made me happy rather than because it was practical or cheap. I filled it slowly with plants, books, and artwork, small expressions of a self I had postponed for years. The money that once disappeared into someone else's crisis began working for me instead, growing into savings and investments that made the future feel expansive rather than frightening. Therapy continued to reshape how I understood my past. I learned that love does not grow deeper when you drain yourself dry, and that sacrifice, when demanded rather than chosen, becomes a form of control. My therapist helped me see that I had been conditioned to confuse usefulness with worth, and that breaking that pattern would feel like loss before it felt like freedom. She was right. Some days still carried echoes of guilt, especially when I thought about the girl I used to be, desperate to be seen. But those moments passed more quickly now, replaced by a steady confidence that I had done the right thing. I also found unexpected community. In support groups and quiet conversations, I met people whose stories mirrored mine in different ways. Adult children who had been treated as resources instead of individuals, givers who were punished for finally stopping. Listening to them reminded me that this pattern was not rare, and that choosing yourself in these situations often requires walking through loneliness before finding connection. Each story reinforced the same truth. You cannot love people into respecting you if disrespect benefits them. My family and I remained distant. There were no dramatic reconciliations, no cinematic apologies, just silence, punctuated occasionally by news passed through relatives. I heard about new jobs, about struggles, about Amanda slowly learning what responsibility felt like without a safety net. I felt sadness for what could have been, but I no longer mistook that sadness for obligation. Distance became not an act of punishment, but an act of preservation. One afternoon, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee I didn't have to ration, I realized how much quieter my mind had become. The constant hum of vigilance, the mental checklist of other people's needs had faded. In its place was clarity. I could make plans without calculating how they might collapse under someone else's emergency. I could imagine joy without bracing for resentment. I could breathe. Looking back, I see that New Year's Eve was not the end of my family, but the end of a lie I had lived inside for most of my life. The lie that my value depended on what I provided. The lie that love required endurance of harm. The lie that boundaries were selfish. Breaking free from that lie cost me relationships, comfort, and the illusion of harmony. But it gave me something far more valuable: myself. If there is one lesson I carry forward, it is this: you are not responsible for fixing people who benefit from staying broken. You are not cruel for stepping back from roles that are destroying you. And you are not ungrateful for wanting a life where your effort is met with respect instead of entitlement. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for others, is to stop enabling what hurts everyone involved. Real family, I've learned, is not defined by shared blood or shared history, but by mutual care. It is made of people who celebrate your successes without seeing them as resources, who show up for your joy as eagerly as they show up for your pain. Choosing that kind of family, whether by redefining old bonds or building new ones, is an act of courage. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt trapped between loyalty and self-respect, know that you are not alone. Your boundaries are allowed. Your peace is worth protecting. And your life does not exist to bankroll someone else's comfort. If you found meaning in this journey, please like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe for more stories about choosing yourself when the world expects you to disappear. I'd love to hear your experience too, so leave a comment and let's remind each other that healing is possible.